We've had 3 weeks of content, so you know what that means. It's time for a news extravaganza. And what a week it's been, with the leading news being Jeffrey Epstein 24/7.
Which is why this isn't really a news week, given all we're going to be talking about is Jeffrey Epstein. So the news episode has been postponed.
Hold on. This is news, though. I mean, the entire week's been a news cycle of Jeffrey Epstein stories. There's nothing more newsworthy than discussing the conspiracy news about Epstein.
Yeah, but it's not really a news episode if all we're talking about is one topic. That seems more like a special report, which seems more like a normal episode of the podcast.
Okay, yeah, but just because there's hardly any other news doesn't mean this isn't a news episode. It's just that there's so much news about one topic that we're probably not going to have time for stories about... We have mysterious explosions in Yonoska, or the Department of Corrections letting the Christchurch terrorists send letters to supporters overseas.
Yeah, well, that seems more like a metaphysical issue. I mean, really...
So push your nonsense to your whole philosophy thing. People don't listen to this podcast to learn things about metaphysics and epistemology. They're here to talk about how Jeffrey Epstein wanted to cryogenically freeze his penis for future use.
Which is now old news.
Which is why you've got to catch people up on the latest news in a news episode. So, it's August the 15th, 2019, and this is...
Not
the news.
Except it isn't.
Int.
Sorry, did you just negate my negation?
No, yes, maybe. Who knows? Roll the theme. No, our theme. The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, brought to you today by Josh Addison and Dr. M. Dentith. Hello and welcome to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy in what may or may not be a news episode. That script was torn from real life. We did basically
torn from the pages of history.
We are actually in a slight state of disagreement as to whether or not this actually counts as a news episode.
Well, actually, I think given that the patron bonus episode is also a news episode, this means this is not a news episode. So I managed to force your hand by basically not doing a special topic for the patrons, meaning that next week will be the news, which will probably be updates on Jeffrey Epstein,
actually,
but also other things as well.
Fine, you've foiled me with your cunning loopholes.
That's why they call me Edwin Foyle.
I thought you were going to say someone loophole. I could have made some sort of...
Edwin Lupine. Loophole. Foyle.
I was going to try and contrive some sort of a vulgar sexual reference around the use of the phrase loophole. But anyway, was not to be. So yes, we're going to be talking about Jeffrey Epstein.
Your mum's a loophole.
It's getting there. It's getting there.
Your mum's my loophole.
Yeah, that's better. There we go. That's the sort of smut I was looking for. Good, wholesome smut, not like the sort of smut that Jeffrey Epstein apparently was known for.
Yeah, we have to deal with that, aren't we?
We are a little bit, yes. Yes, things may get mildly distasteful, but I think we can stick to mostly talking about the most recent events and the conspiracy theories around them.
Yes.
So I don't think we have any announcements or what have you. No brand spanking new patrons.
No.
Okay.
Just this dispute about whether this is a news episode, which I kind of crushed.
I'm afraid you actually won that one. I'll have to give you that. So then I suppose we should just get into it if there's nothing else.
We should. That reminded me of communion wine for a moment there.
How so?
Given it's whiskey, and communion wine is usually red wine. Oh, it's the port finish on the whiskey. Reminding me of sacraments.
I was going to say
sacraments.
Either you have slightly odd taste buds, or you went to a slightly odd church.
Both.
Could be both. Let's talk about Jeffrey Epstein. So I'm assuming we don't need to tell you that Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his prison cell. I think it was like a Saturday morning American time, so probably Friday night our time.
Yes.
We can skip ahead a little bit. We know you probably know who Jeffrey Epstein is. You probably know that he died recently, and you probably know that people started slinging conspiracy theories the exact instant his death became public knowledge. And indeed, when his death became public knowledge,
it is subject to a conspiracy theory of its own. But we'll get to that eventually.
So where to start? there's people have been getting into conspiracy theories pretty much straight away. People who claim to not normally be into conspiracy theories are getting into things straight away.
Let's have a brief break here to talk about I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but...
Yes.
Now, this is the podcaster's guide to the conspiracy theory. No, just a guide to the conspiracy. There's no theory involved. Although actually there is going to be, because now I'm going to engage in conspiracy theory now. We are a podcast which is devoted to looking at conspiracy theories through the lens of the thesis of particularism, which says that conspiracy theories are simply theories about conspiracies, and the evidence decides whether a conspiracy theory is warranted or unwarranted. So there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm a conspiracy theorist. You don't need to put a but at the end. If you're going to then justify your belief in a conspiracy theory, you need to provide arguments and evidence for that particular conspiracy theory. But there's nothing prima facie wrong with being a conspiracy theorist. Now, this is confronting to a lot of people at the moment, because a lot of people want to believe a conspiracy theory about the death of Jeffrey Epstein, but are embarrassed to express it because of the embarrassment from the I'm not a conspiracy theorist but style of locution. Now, I think it's reasonable to at least be suspicious about Jeffrey Epstein's death, even if it turns out I don't think his death is particularly suspicious myself. Because Jeffrey Epstein was a famous individual who was famous for having rich and powerful friends. He was a famous individual because he engaged in a rather interesting elite activity, pedophilia and child trafficking, and he seems to have had a prior suicide attempt, which some people think was an attack upon his life in prison. So all of these factors are the kind of thing that go, his death is the kind of thing which, at least prima facie, looks really unusual and ought to be explained. Now, the explanation of Jeffrey Epstein's death may well be a conspiracy theory. Or it could turn out to be suicide, or it could turn out to be a cock-up by the prison system in the US, which would be shocking if that turned out to be true. But his death is suspicious, it needs explanation, explanations are being proffered. The job of people like ourselves, and I'm including our audience here, is to work through the evidence to work out what is the best thing to believe. So there's nothing wrong about suspecting that maybe there's a conspiracy here, as long as you can provide evidence for that claim. And we're going to try to provide some evidence for and against the conspiracy theory over the course of this episode.
I think we are, yes. Yeah, I mean, there seem to be several factors, a bit of a perfect storm when it comes to the sorts of things.
Who was it in that film?
Clooney? Was it Clooney and Wahlberg?
Maybe.
I'm sure it was George Clooney. Yeah. Indeed, who's been drawn into it because
precisely.
Epstein's partner claims to have had some dalliance with George Clooney. But anyway, the various factors that have made a whole lot of people sit up and go, hang on. I mean, so yes, he's famous, wealthy, well-connected seems to be the thing,
well-connected.
And indeed is apparently known to have said that he has dirt on numerous famous and powerful people.
I mean, I suppose actually we should talk about why Epstein is famous. So Epstein is a wealthy financier who also enjoys a bit of the old child sex, or at least did, because he's dead now, allegedly, although we'll get onto that as well, who held very illustrious parties, inviting the richest and the finest people in the land to attend those parties.
Was he the one who had the plane?
Yes, the plane and also Orgy Island.
Yes.
So he was rich, powerful, and very connected. He gave a lot of money to educational and financial institutions around the world, which of course meant that he kept on being invited to prestigious do's. So when people are worried about his association with other famous people, whether it be Steven Pinker or George Clooney, it's because he did hang out with a lot of very powerful, very rich people, including former presidents of the United States and the current president of the United States. So this is not the death of a nobody. This is not the death of a mid-level celebrity. This is the death of someone who is very well connected to most of the powerful people in the English-speaking world.
Yes, and not just not just connected to them, but supposedly had fairly unsavoury relationships to some of them, given that he has been jailed in the past and was in jail up until last week for apparently being a sort of a... Is fixer the right word? Being someone who could arrange for illicit and 100% illegal activities if you had the connections and the money to get into it. And that, of course, then gives him large amounts of dirt on anyone who did avail themselves of his services. Basically perfect blackmail material. So it's not just that he was a notable and well-connected figure. He is a notable and well-connected figure who certain other notable and well-connected figures would probably be quite happy if he were to disappear.
Say, like the recently retired Prince Andrew,
yes,
who retired from public life as of today, and was heavily implicated in the Jeffrey Epstein scandal.
And so at the moment, given that Trump is the current president, there's been lots of stories about the relationship between Epstein and Trump. Lots of videos of them at parties and the stories about
including some very awkward dancing.
Then Epstein arranging parties that appeared to have only he and Trump and a whole bunch of young models at them, and so on and so forth. But yes, I mean Bill Clinton was
famously rode that plane.
Rode the plane, yep. So it's from all sides of the political spectrum, I suppose. Although if we're talking about Americans, they're all pretty much fairly righty anyway, aren't they?
It's true. So, yes, even the Democrats are a right-wing party compared to our policy.
By international standards, yes. Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's kind of count one. He's a notable figure. So anytime a notable figure dies suddenly or possibly mysteriously, people want an explanation. But not only that, he's a notable figure who could be considered a liability to certain other very powerful people.
Yep.
And then we get into the circumstances of his death. Officially, I don't know if there's been an official... they haven't officially announced cause of death, have they?
No, they have not. At least not at time of recording.
No, but... it certainly appears that his death is being reported as a suicide. And then that has jumped out at people because, hang on, wasn't he on suicide watch?
Now, the thing about suicide watch, Joshua, the thing about suicide watch is that you don't actually keep people on suicide watch for long periods of time because keeping people on suicide watch leads to a sense of a loss of autonomy, which increases the chances of someone subsequently committing suicide.
Yes, suicide watch, strict, sort of the most severe kind of suicide watch means not letting the other person out of your sight for a single second. It means having someone there
having had a relative under
all the time.
Suicide watch in the last year, it's very, very confronting.
And so they like to step it down as quickly as possible because, yes, having complete loss of personal autonomy is likely to add much more psychological stress. So if you're worried about someone being suicidal, that's while it's immediately, maybe putting a stop to it, it's only going to be exacerbating the situation in the long or even in the short to mid-term. So they do step it down as quickly as they can once they feel able to.
Or de-escalate it, as they say it in the trade.
And that is apparently what had happened to Epstein, to the extent that he had apparently actually been taken off suicide watch, hadn't he? Although he was still being monitored, supposedly I've heard every 15 minutes or every half hour.
Yes, last I heard it was every half hour, but it turns out in this particular case they hadn't checked on him for about 4 hours.
Yes, and so that's the other thing. So immediately... as with any event, the internet was suddenly full of experts.
I'm an expert, just not on this topic.
Not on the suicide of Jeffrey Epstein, no. So you had people immediately claiming that there was absolutely no way it could have been suicide because he was in this maximum security prison they had. Who else was there? El Chapo? They've had other sort of fairly high-profile prisoners there. It's sort of the best of the best. They don't make mistakes. They know what they're doing. He would have been under all this guard and so on. It would have been completely impossible for him to commit suicide. Then you get other people saying, well, actually, no, it was perfectly possible for him to have committed suicide because this is what actually happens and so on and so forth. And then other people saying, yes, okay, this was a high-profile, big, important sort of, what exactly was it? Manhattan...
It's the MCC.
Metropolitan Correctional Centre. The MCC is, is big, high profile, important, large, fancy, I assume, grey, I expect. Running out of adjectives here. But the point is...
So I'm just focused on the fact it's MCC, and I'm thinking Disney are not going to want to license that for their next Marvel film. It's a Marvel Correctional Centre.
No, probably not.
It's where they'll put the ghost of Thanos? I have no idea.
Probably.
I don't know where I'm going with this.
No, you don't.
I haven't even seen an MCU film in a long time.
No, if they're not your thing, they're not your thing.
They're not.
No. What was I saying? No, yes, so because the MCC was apparently such a well-known institution, people have said that no, it's you couldn't commit suicide there, but then other people have said, well, actually, you're basing it on sort of the movie version, the Law and Order Dick Wolf version of the legal system, or the
as opposed to the chronically underfunded American system of prisons, which are not good at the best of times, but are particularly bad when they're not well funded.
Yes, so immediately talk came out that the prison was understaffed, the staff there were overworked, and therefore had been cutting corners, and so supposedly the stories are now out that surveillance footage shows that the guards hadn't checked on him at the half-hour schedule and had simply falsified the log records to say that they had, and in fact it had been a couple of hours since he was last checked on before he was found. So certainly he had the time to have taken his own life if he wanted to.
But Josh, the killers also had the time to do what they were doing without being inspected or surveilled.
Well, that's the other thing, yes. So, I mean, it does kind of go both ways.
Let's talk about the prior suicide attempt.
Yeah, because that seems one of the things people have leaned on, yeah.
So, Jeffrey Epstein, several weeks ago, is said to have attempted suicide. So he was found in his cell unconscious with wounds around the neck, which might have been an attempt at strangulation or may have been evidence of an assault. Various news reports claim that Epstein claimed to have been assaulted. Other news reports say no, authorities are investigating it to see whether it is an assault because Epstein claimed to not remember what happened at the time. I believe it's still an open question as to exactly what occurred.
And last I heard, it hadn't been confirmed whether or not he actually had a cellmate at the time either. So yeah, that one's still a little bit up in the air. And whether or not you believe it was a suicide attempt or an assault does certainly colour what you might want to think about his death now.
If you think it was a prior suicide attempt, that is evidence of suicidal ideation, and evidence of suicidal ideation, particularly given the psychological stress Epstein was undergoing with the thought of imprisonment, a trial, more imprisonment and the like, might make you go, well, maybe he did take his own life. Or if you think it was an assault and thus planned by people in the prison or orchestrated by people outside the prison, then that makes you go, it is suspicious that he then died, isn't it?
On the other hand, you could imagine a scenario where it was assault. He may not have been suicidal initially, but then getting assaulted like that would have would have given him the idea, if I go to prison, this is what it's going to be like for me for the rest of my life, which could have then made him more suicidal than he had been in the first place. There are lots of varieties when it comes to the conspiracy theories, aren't there?
There really are.
So, I mean, for starters, straight up conspiracy theory number one, he was murdered. It wasn't suicide, it was merely staged to look like suicide. Agents of whichever powerful person you happen to prefer killed him and simply made it look that way. But there are lots of, much as with, say, the 9/11 conspiracy theories, where there's a whole range of spectrums in between the Bush administration orchestrated the entire thing, made it all happen on purpose, all the way down to they simply capitalized on an event they had no control over. There's a wide range of positions in between he was murdered by people who wanted him silenced to he took his own life with no outside aid. You could suggest, for instance...
middle ground, which is he was gently encouraged to commit suicide.
He was... known to be suicidal, and therefore guards were bribed or otherwise persuaded to look the other way, allowing, so it's possible you could say he did commit suicide but was helped along the way somehow.
Encouraged to do it.
Mm-hmm. And then I understand there are some reports that there was neither suicide nor murder.
Yes, some people claim he's faked his death, or his death has been faked. So there are two varieties here. One is that Epstein faked his own death to then leave the prison and possibly go back to his orgy island or live somewhere outside the States and live out his life in anonymity. Others claim his death was faked so he could be moved to Guantanamo Bay and moved into Gitmo.
Isn't that what all the QAnon people think's going to happen to all the people when the day comes?
It's true. They do think that Gitmo is going to be filled with the elite pedophiles that Donald Trump is ferreting out in the American system. And it is largely QAnon people who are claiming that Epstein's death has been faked and he has been moved to Gitmo.
Yes, the whole QAnon thing, maybe we'll save that till later, because I think there's still stuff we can talk about specifically around Epstein's death and the conspiracy theories there. One interest, another little wrinkle, was that apparently his death was mentioned on 4chan a good half hour, 40 minutes before it started showing up on news networks. Now some people have taken, now 4chan is where your alt-righty, nutty, QAnon-y people hang out a little bit.
It's not quite as bad as 8chan, but still.
Not as bad as 8chan, no. So maybe, where your conspiracy theorists go. Is that a deal? Is that a big deal, or is that simply the speed of the internet these days? How, especially, it turned out that this was correct, but if word had got out, rumours travel much faster than even news agencies.
Yes, I mean, I always think of what happened when Osama bin Laden's death was announced by the White House. So there was an announcement there was going to be a White House press briefing on the day. People on Twitter were going, I wonder what's that about. They then trawled through news reports, rumours coming out of military bases and the like, and they very quickly centred on the notion it was going to be an announcement about the death of Osama bin Laden about 45 minutes before the White House press briefing occurred. And it turns out that yes, there are people online who are paying attention to a whole bunch of rumours and to kind of underground news networks who are able to get the jump on the conventional news. So no, there's nothing particularly unusual about a commenter on 4chan who might have special access to someone making that particular announcement. It doesn't necessarily show premeditation or knowledge of a plot. It simply means that someone in the chain of information has slipped up and someone on the internet has got hold of that slip up and publicised it before it was meant to be announced to the world.
Yes, I mean, apparently the guards and their supervisor were immediately sort of put on leave or what have you, so who knows?
I mean, all it requires is one
person to go, Jesus, you'll never believe what happened today.
To text their partner or to text a friend going, oh my God, Jeffrey Epstein is dead.
I'm in
for
such
that,
shit.
And that person to then go, I'm going to tell all my friends, and then someone to go on 4chan, I've just heard that.
Which is, seems to have been what happened. So, other issues around this. Motive seems to be one of the key factors behind the conspiracy theories. There were people who had motive to get Jeffrey Epstein to be quiet forever. But what actual effect will his death have on the case?
That's a good question, because there are a lot of folk lawyers out there who are making all sorts of claims about what this means. Some people are saying the case is now closed because Epstein is dead and there's no one to prosecute. Other people are saying, no, it just makes it much easier for the authorities to investigate because Epstein can no longer protest against people going through his goods and his estate. At this stage, it looks like the investigation is going to continue. There's also going to be an investigation into his death and the failures that led to said death, although of course people are going, well, if it was a conspiracy, all they'll do is cover that up. But no, at this stage, his death is not going to have an effect upon the investigation, although maybe it means that certain people aren't going to be called up as witnesses. So maybe some people have closed things down to stop having to perjure themselves in court. Now, of course, what's interesting about this is that, as I mentioned in the Patreon episode last week, some of us have been suffering a bit of a Mandela effect about Jeffrey Epstein. Because for people like me who I was fairly sure he was prosecuted for crimes over a decade ago, why is this in the news now? I kind of thought we already knew about this. It turns out it's not the Mandela effect. Jeffrey Epstein was convicted for crimes back in 2008.
Yep.
And spent some time in prison.
How much time did he spend in prison?
Well, he was meant to spend 10 years, but you know how probation works in good behaviour, so he spent about 13 months. And he didn't even spend 13 months full-time in prison, no. He got day release 6 days a week for 12 hours a day so that he could leave his prison to go and work in his office. And when he was on site, he was actually running apparently a non-profit in the old infirmary where the deputies who were guarding him had to wear suits and act as secretaries. So people have pointed out that the last time Epstein was prosecuted and spent time in prison...
And it was for essentially the same sorts of things he was being prosecuted now.
Yeah, except it turns out that when he was prosecuted, the prosecutor decided to find the least offensive thing he had done and only prosecute him for that, giving him this really lenient sentence that was made even more lenient by the prison authorities, who gave probation and early release, which kind of allowed him to have a very, very sweet deal at the time. And so my concern about the conspiracy theory that Epstein was killed by the authorities is the last time Epstein was up on charges, they gave him a very, very sweet deal and he said nothing. Why wouldn't you think they would do the same thing again?
Yes.
Why kill him this time when you know that if you give him a sweet deal, he'll simply spend his 13 months not even really in prison? I mean, after he left prison, he had to register as a sex offender in New York. He was allowed to go and spend time on his Caribbean island, go out on long shopping trips, go walk along beaches. It turns out that prison for rich people, particularly the ultra-rich and the ultra-wealthy, turns out to be a pretty sweet deal.
Yes, I've seen someone on Twitter was saying, hey, remember when the Panama Papers came out and we found about the rich people's secret tax haven islands and nothing was really done? Well, now we found out about their secret underage sex island.
And we're not doing anything about that either.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it does seem it's quite an about-face. I mean, of course, you could say then that because there are so many people, as we say, from different areas who could be implicated by Epstein, that maybe it was one crowd sort of gave him the sweetheart treatment, sweetheart deal last time, and this time it was a different and thoroughly more ruthless crowd who thought they'd better settle things their way. Who the hell knows? But yeah, it is something that needs to be taken into account when you're talking about these conspiracy theories. Now, one thing that I note you put down here, the law firm that represented him in the 2008 case included one William Barr.
You mean
that would be
Attorney General
William Barr? Yes.
Yes, who is at the stage leading the investigation into the death of Jeffrey Epstein, which is leading people to be very concerned given his prior connection to Epstein and prosecutions against, working with law firms during the prosecution of Epstein. So, yeah, there are concerns that maybe prominent members of the Trump administration are not the kind of people who should be involved in subsequent investigations of the fate of Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes, I mean, Barr has apparently said federal prosecutors' investigation into those who might have facilitated Epstein's alleged sex abuse of minors will continue even if Epstein himself can no longer be prosecuted. But yes, people have sort of given him the old side eye.
They sure have.
Given how things turned out last time. And given his shenanigans around the Mueller report and everything as well. So certainly if Barr appears to have shown great sort of loyalty to Trump, and if Trump is one of the people who could be in trouble due to the Epstein case, yes, people do wonder exactly how that's going to turn out. But that's not all. You've got the conspiracy theories around exactly what happened, the conspiracy theories around the cover-ups and all the other ones. You can't have a good story these days without getting conspiracies around the Russians, though, and their armies of Twitter bots.
It's true, they do have armies of robots on the internet ready at a press of a button to be deployed against, well, anyone.
So apparently people who track these things reckon that immediately after Epstein's death, the top trending topics being promoted by Twitter bots included Epstein suicide, Epstein murder, and good old Clinton death count. It's back, baby!
Yeah, and even being retweeted by PR hacks in this country like Matthew Hooton.
Well, was he going specifically Clinton death count?
He was, yeah.
Dear.
And I can't quite tell whether it was satire or seriousness, and if it was satire, it wasn't even very good satire.
No. And obviously we've talked about the Clinton death count before because it's a bit of a classic, bit old school, that one. And I think most people who actually look at, I mean, first of all, the supposed list of people who the Clintons have had killed is fairly amorphous, and it's hard to get a quote unquote official list. But
if only the Clinton Foundation would provide it.
Yeah. But what lists there have been seem to be very tenuous in terms of this person was known to the Clintons, and it's sometimes to the extent that it even goes to this person knew this person who we thought was killed by the Clintons, so they sort of, it gets points removed, and a lot of these supposedly suspicious deaths don't appear to have anything suspicious to them, and so on. And it flared up briefly with the whole Seth Rich thing, which we've talked about plenty, and
now Jeffrey Epstein, although Epstein seems to have associations with both the Democrats and the Republicans, so why the Clintons as the people behind it, I don't know.
Well,
they're not actually in power at the moment.
No, yes, but people hate them on the right anyway.
They do.
So I think that's...
They do.
I don't think we need to look too far for a motive there. So there are numerous angles. I think another interesting one, though, is the whole sort of that we talked about a bit at the beginning, the mainstreaming a little bit of conspiracy theories. This case, more than many others in recent times, appears to be the one that's getting people saying, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but this seems to be the example that has lots of people saying, well, you know, actually...
Yeah, so this is a lot like what happened with the death of UN Weapons Inspector David Kelly around the time of the invasion of Iraq, where he apparently walked out into the woods and committed suicide, having said he had information disastrous to the UK's claim that there were reasons to suspect there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And at that time, going back to 2003, people are going, yeah, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but this is a bit weird. And we're getting the same thing here, which is leading to some people being really, really irate that people are discussing conspiracy theories openly. And then I think there's a little bit of, no, I'm the qualified expert, I only get to talk about conspiracy theories, you don't get to talk about conspiracy theories style reactions. But yes, it is kind of mainstreaming conspiracy theories in the same respect that when the dirty politics saga occurred here, and John Key tried to go, well, it's just Nikki Hager, he's one of those conspiracy theorists, and the public response was, well, that might be true, but what about this story? Isn't there something to it?
Has anybody got in touch with you about the Epstein business?
No, not at all. Not at all. Apparently I'm not in his address book, so no one's calling me.
Because, I mean, for our international listeners, Em has been something of a spokesperson at times when a conspiracy issue has come up and someone wants a soundbite.
I have been asked to provide that bite
it has happened
in
the
sound
past.
form.
but not this time. So we're approaching the end of our time limit, I think, but
So we should have pizza.
we should have pizza from
a gate.
Ping pong from the gate and the. But yeah, so basically we mentioned QAnon at the beginning, and I said we'd have to come back to them. So we really do, because obviously conspiracy theories, leaving all the ones we talked about aside, this all started because of a conspiracy. The Epstein is up on conspiracy, or was up on conspiracy charges. He was part of a conspiracy to engage in illegal acts involving underage sex and the sex trafficking of underage people. That's a proper conspiracy, no doubt about that. And it's interesting that any theories about this conspiracy sound awfully like a lot of the QAnon stuff.
Or David Icke and the elite pedophile network in the UK.
Of wealthy and powerful people who can essentially live above the law, have been involved in sex trafficking and underage sex. That's the kind of thing that the QAnon folks keep talking about, and indeed David Icke, and yet they never really talk about Epstein, do they? I mean, it's always been, certainly in the case of QAnon, it's all the people they don't like, the ones, the Democratic ones, the lefty ones, and yet Epstein seems to have certainly played both sides of the fence, coin,
garden,
game, whatever it is.
I don't know.
He's
whatever the analogy is, he's played both sides.
Exactly.
Or at least he did. Unless he's in Gitmo, at which point, or in France, who knows. Yeah, there's something really interesting here. So it's been a long-standing kind of rumour about political elites, and going all the way back to the ancient Romans and probably even further. I just happen to know about the Roman example of political elites engaging in child sex. So the Emperor Tiberius was famously accused by patrician writers after his death of having sex with young boys, swimming with the minnows. The minnows were these young boys who would swim between his legs and suck him off. You should read Suetonius' The 12 Caesars. It's very titillating. So there's been these long-standing rumours about elite pedophile networks. People used to make the same claim about Helen Clark in this country, that not only was she a secret lesbian running the country, but she was facilitating Labour Party sex camps where people would have sex with young children, etc., etc. It turns out that there are elite pedophiles who have been operating at the highest echelons of society. Jimmy Savile in the UK, Jeffrey Epstein in America.
And associates.
And we have this kind of weird thing. Are Icke and the QAnon people with their Pizzagates, were they on to something? Or is it largely a coincidence that this has been this long-standing rumour of elite pedophiles in our society operating behind the scenes, and it turns out in this particular case there really are. And of course this kind of can be unpacked in a variety of different ways, in that it's possible that everybody who was rich and powerful knew about Savile in the UK and Epstein in America. Because it seems, at least in Epstein's case, he was also running a very effective blackmail technique of luring people into having sex with minors and then going, it's fine, look, I won't say anything about it. You loan me some money or invest some money in one of my schemes, which we'll keep offshore, and I'll never, ever talk about it. And so it's quite possible this was a known secret, as it kept secret from the public, but known amongst members who were involved in Epstein. But of course, because they had been blackmailed and the shame of being caught out for what they did meant they would never talk about it. So maybe it was a largely known thing, a lot like the rumours about R. Kelly in the music industry.
Yes, which we've talked about more than once and recently as well, I think.
In a patron bonus episode.
I mean, that's, well, it's, R. Kelly, people have been making references to his predilection for underage women for decades, since the 90s, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, until recently, it's never really gone anywhere. It's always just kind of been joking. There's just been, R. Kelly likes them young. And it's like, you don't know he does. He likes them illegally young.
Yeah.
We know this. And it's taken forever for anything to happen there. So people about her, Jeffrey Epstein is less of a celebrity than R. Kelly, certainly.
Yeah. So in that situation where lots of people know, but people have a vested interest in keeping it secret, maybe there are people like David Icke who have some connection to the rich and the powerful, given previous work as a BBC sports journalist, etc., and people within the Q community who hang out with other people with rich and powerful friends. It's also quite possible that many of the people in Epstein's circle literally had no idea what else was going on at those parties. They were simply invited along, they were hobnobbing with the rich and powerful, and were unaware that some people were having underage sex behind closed doors. And maybe it is just a coincidence that people made rumours about elite pedophile networks for a long period of time. But no matter whether it's a coincidence or people knowing things, people like your David Ickes and your people who believe in the Pizzagate conspiracy theory, or promoters of it, like Mike Cernovich on Twitter, are using what's happened here to go, look, we were right the entire time. If we're right about this, we must be right about the other stuff too.
So, I mean, yes, a single death nevertheless has a whole lot of issues and related issues around it, enough indeed to fill an entire episode, which I guess it turns out, you're right, wasn't a news episode after all.
Not at all.
Even though it is actually news.
It's topical, it's newsworthy, it just isn't the subject of a news episode, because a news episode requires us to talk about multiple news cases.
Righto. So I guess that's what we're going to do next week then.
Yes. Unless someone else famous dies.
Yes. Which works out because there's still 1 week left in August anyway, isn't it? So it can be the news one for August. It all works out. Everything's fine.
I mean, we have to work out whether we then do 2 weeks of content and then a news episode after that. We'll find some ways to
life finds a way.
It'll work out in the aggregate. We won't be doing September news in October. That would be ridiculous.
That would be madness personified.
But patrons get news.
They do.
They get exciting news because we're going to talk about a potentially nuclear-powered intercontinental ballistic missile the Russians may have accidentally blown up on their own soil. We'll be talking about how the Christchurch terrorist has been sending mail to people on 4chan, which is turning out to be a bit of an awkward issue back here.
Just a little bit, yes.
James O'Keefe from Project Veritas has shot himself in the foot, figuratively, once again. And what's happening with QAnon and Q themselves now that 8chan is either gone or at least very, very hard to access.
So if you're one of our patrons, you can download the bonus episode and find out all about those things. If you're not one of our patrons and you'd like to be, you could pop over to patreon.com or go to where this website is, where this podcast is hosted at conspiracism.podbean.com and use their native patronage thing, although I think Patreon's probably easier, isn't it?
It is, yes.
It's a bit more mainstream. Anyway, so do that if you want, and if you don't feel like becoming one of our patrons, that's just fine. We are more than happy to simply have you as our listeners.
We still love you. We still love you.
Just not as much. It's, everybody has a favourite child. We don't admit it.
Yeah, and we've got several favourite children now.
So I believe that is all we had to talk about in this main episode. So we are going to stop recording and then immediately start recording a bonus episode. But for all the rest of you, have yourselves a good day.
La vida diare. You've been listening to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, starring Josh Addison and Dr. M.R.X. Denton, which is written, researched, recorded and produced by Josh and M. You can support the podcast by becoming a patron via its Podbean or Patreon campaigns. And if you need to get in contact with either Josh or M, you can email them at podcastconspiracy@gmail.com or check their Twitter accounts, Monkey Fluids and Conspiracism.